Yeah, the connection was there.
Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another Golden Record track breakdown, and today we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite tracks off of the album called 32nd Street. Now, this is actually one of the very first tracks that we made for this whole album, and we've been sitting on it for so long, in fact, that this track existed before really the whole idea of what the Golden Record would become existed. So this all started with me back in early quarantine, probably around April or May. I reached out to my good friend Sarah and I was like, look, we're all stuck at home. I'm trying to work with as many people as I can. Let's make something happen. So pretty quickly we were trying to figure out, okay, what kind of style would we want to do? What kind of sonic world did we want to exist in? And both of us had been listening to a whole lot of lo-fi at the time, still do. And so we were like, okay, great. We're going to do a lo-fi track. Now, I'd also been listening to a lot of jazz at the time, a lot of like Herbie Hancock, Takuya Kuroda, Yoko Kanno, who's very famous for doing her music. She did all the music for Cowboy Bebop. So I was like really ready to make a kind of jazzy, I didn't want something to be too necessarily lo-fi, you know? I wanted some of that jazziness involved, a little sax, a little something extra in there. And so that is what 32nd Street became. It started with the idea of a lo-fi thing, threw in a bit of jazz, and it really helped to create kind of a sonic foundation for what Golden Record might further become down the line. So let's go ahead and dive into Ableton and start talking about all of this stuff. So when you first start off making a lo-fi track, there are a few jumping off points that you kind of have made for you. That can be some jazzy chords with maybe a seventh thrown in there. It can be some vocal sample that you're chopping up or something like that, maybe from an old movie, or it can be a texturally rich atmosphere. So I obviously went with the atmosphere choice a little bit, starting off here. So before I show you anything too specific going on inside of here, I just want you to listen to all of these different elements without having like visual representations for them. So all you're going to hear is everything that I have in the textures folder and what is in the vocals folder.
Yeah, the connection was there from the very beginning. I think it was subtle, but I think as soon as we continued to dive deeper into each other's minds and hearts, they started to feel familiar, like as if I knew them in another life.
See how texturally rich that is? There's a lot going on. There's a lot of different noises, atmosphere, ear candy. There's something for the audience to listen to gravitate towards every second, basically. So let's go ahead and open up this folder so you can actually see what's going on in here. Now, the first thing I'm going to point out is that I have 3 different rain and thunder files in here. And you can see that the thunder sort of falls throughout the track, and then there's a steady rain presence throughout the whole thing. Now, the reason I have 3 of these in here is because nature does not make the same sound twice. It is one of my biggest pet peeves in the world when I go and see a play or something and there's a big storm happening and I hear the exact same thunder cue 4 fucking times in a row. It tells me that you as a sound designer have no work ethic and you're lazy as fuck. And it tells me that you as a director have no artistic care about what actually is going into your sonic environments. It's a huge pet peeve of mine. And so that is why we have rain, rain and thunder, and then rain and thunder 2, is all of these add extra little qualities throughout the whole of the piece that add that organicness so that nothing ever feels like you're hearing the exact same sample multiple times in a row. Now, the next thing that we have in here is some wind chimes, some lovely wind chimes, mostly present at the top, but they come back in near the end just to add a bit of cohesion amongst all of our textures. Of course, the traffic that we talked about at the end of Love, it's still the same sample that's coming in here to stitch them all together, same with the traffic at the end. Then we have 2 kind of tonal ambiences. We have this one here, and then this lighter ambient texture down here. So let's listen to these 2 just simultaneously. One of them I think you'll be able to really identify in the full mix. A lot of little record scratches, some warble. This pad is very low, this texture. Listen to this again. Like, there's really not a lot in there. It's mostly adding a frequency in a certain ranges that helps to add some of that tape warbly kind of crickle crackle lo-fi that everyone loves. Now, this next one, the lighter texture, it is in the higher frequencies, and this is one that you can hear cut through the mix pretty regularly. Especially that that little morph. You can even hear some of those hisses and noise, the tape artifacts are in there. I mean, the song is definitely lo-fi inspired, but we don't fully commit to that full-on lo-fi kind of grunge and tape warping that is very common in there. Like I said in the intro, I wanted a bit more jazziness involved as well. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the vocals. So you can see down here we have two different tracks. This is the track that all of the singing is on, this top one. And then this bottom one, this is all of our voiceover, kind of the conversation and stuff that you're hearing at the top and then at the end. Now the vocals, they have very standard kind of vocal processing, a little EQ, compressor, some limiter. This Neutron is part of the Isotope plugins, and it's a really great vocal plugin to help just really kind of lift and saturate things in a way that you like. And then of course we have a little delay that you can see by that red dot, maybe is automated. Now, as we've talked about in previous things, there is the freezing and flattening of tracks, and a lot of tracks in this one are frozen, as you'll see, because they are incredibly plug-in heavy. Now, you might think that this voiceover track might just be, you know, simple lo-fi. There's probably not a lot to be done to it, but if you look, I have quite the effects rack on here. So we've got some EQ that's cutting out a lot of our low end and kind of boosting things around here. You can see this weird little cut down right here, and that's because there was a frequency very specifically in that range that I did not like in this recording, and so I was trying to cut that out. Then the limiter, the gain, we set that to 420. And then further down the line, you will see I have RX8 dehum, 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 dehum 4 times in a row. And that's because Sara recorded this original sound sample on her phone, just like on her iPhone. I'm not sure where she put it. You can hear a lot of her moving the phone around when you just listen to it isolated. You know, and then she goes and sits down.
Yeah.
And starts talking. And so there's a lot of interesting kind of extra movement noise in here that I didn't want to lose because it adds again to that lo-fi quality that people really like. But it really comes together to make a quite an interesting piece, having these kinds of crispy little audio hits here and there that you can't really replicate. Again, it's all about the organicness of this track. There's not a lot of like just copy paste. Now, let's head up, since we've talked about the textures and our vocals a bit, let's go into the instrumental. So something I do a lot in my music, and especially if it's a track that I think is going to be vocal forward or vocal heavy, is build up the instrumental as much as I can first. Now what this does is, one, allows me to have a bit more of a better understanding of the world of the track, sort of the emotional storytelling of the track, but then two, it's also a great way to get these early complexities and ear candies into your instrumental sooner rather than later. Now, that's not to say that there's going to be times where you really build up an instrumental, add some lyrics to it, and find that they clash, your instrumental and your vocals are very much not working together, and that's totally okay. It is a starting point. So you get your instrumental as fleshed out as you can, you bring those lyrics in, and then you can let your lyrics really guide you as to whether you're taking stuff away or adding more to the instrumental of your track and making it that much more a cohesive, well thought out, complex, and interesting piece to listen to. So with all of that said, we gotta start by talking about what my sonic anchor was for the track, and that's this lead key loop. Now, it's made up of two different parts, some chords and a pad, but they are both playing the exact same melodic elements, and together really make a really nice, rounded out, warm, kind of nostalgic lo-fi tone to them. So I'll let you listen to them both brought in together. And you might be able to tell just by looking at the waveform that the chords are doing a lot of the heavy lifting of this sound. But the pad is still essential to the final outcome of what this whole piece sounds like together. So let's listen to the pads just on their own. You can hear it's a lot lighter in tone, but it's the same melodic elements. A lot more reverb present here in the actual waveform, not necessarily in the send. They have an equal reverb send. But it adds a lot of great width to the spectrum, the stereo spectrum of the initial chord progression. When you take out the pad, it just loses some of that fullness, and it might be hard to hear over the iPhone speakers, but that is the reason for both the chords and the pads existing simultaneously. There's only a few moments where we cut the pad out entirely while the chord is still doing something, but it's almost exclusively when the chords are being faded out for a transitional moment. Now, the last little bit of these keys are these backing keys, which on their own sound closer to a lead than they do as a textural element or a backing element. But because we're not using it too frequently and more so just in these spots here and there, they add more of a textural transitional element between moments from here to there. So we'll solo them just so you can hear what they sound like on their own. Really like how that sounds, but then when you mix it in with the chords and the pad, you really get a full kind of key element. And you can hear that there's a fade here between this moment, just a little one, and that's because I wanted more of the key impact tone of the chord than rather what was present in that backing key. So then that will take us into our bass, which is a huge component of this track and is heavily dripping in compression and the RC20. Now I'm going to turn everything off so you can kind of hear what the raw sound of this bass was. Versus what happens when we turn on all of these plugins, the compressor, the EQ, and the RC20. Way more presence. Now, obviously, a lot of the drive is coming from the RC20. Just by turning it off, you can hear immediately it change. Off. Pretty wild, right? But then this EQ afterwards, the stereo EQ, and then this side EQ is just help cleaning up some of the frequency boosting that the RC20 did in the low end that was kind of muddying up some of the other stuff. Now, going from our bass, we'll head into our little guitar loop, and the guitar loop's very simple. It's nothing too complicated. Nothing too crazy going on here. Some basic EQ, a little compression, and a slight delay just to add some space between the notes here. But the biggest change is going from just taking the sample and shifting it up 3 semitones to add some sonic and textural variation. So those are 3 semitones up, then we come back to it, we're low, back up, and then same with this section over here. We start low and go higher. It just helps to add to the intensity as well as building up and showing where the story's going, talking a little bit about how emotionally we can continue driving the song further with its own little elements, nothing too crazy, nothing too complicated. So then this brings us to our drums. Now the whole drum bus has the Cymatics Diablo plugin turned on and sitting on it, which we've talked about before. Really great plugin. I really like the way Cymatics does the user interface for them. You can read the manual and then just jump into it real quick. And then the other thing that is present in the kick as well as Diablo plugin is this DS10 drum shaper. Now this is made by XLN Audio. It's the same people that made the RC20. It's got 3 different settings for kicks, snares, or if you're dropping it on a full drum bus. But in the kick setting, which is what we're focused on, we're going to look at the attack, sustain, and what they call mojo, which just adds a bit of tightness to the sound. Now the attack is the initial impact of the sound. Think about the drumstick hitting the drum or your fist hitting your hand. That's the attack. The sustain is this noise, the tail of the sound that follows afterwards. So you can see that I've got the attack boosted a bit as well as the sustain boosted a bit. And that's just because I wanted that sound a little more impactful and I wanted the tail of it to hang around just a little bit more. So you can hear the kick on its own momentarily. And you can see there the attack and the sustain has been boosted. But if I turn this off, you hear how you lose a lot of that punch, and more so the sustain doesn't sound as natural. So you bring those two together. I just really like that little breathiness, the airiness that boost and sustain brings to the overall mix of the drums. The hats themselves have no effects on them as well as the snare, and that's the extent of this. It was all programmed inside of DrumLab, Native Instruments DrumLab, and it creates just a real simple but effective drum kit. So let's listen to them all together. So yeah, now there's one more thing that I want to talk about a little bit in the drums before we move up to our saxophone, and that is that we have some side chaining done. You can see I have this kick room group, which has all of the melodic elements, our lead key loop, the backing keys, the sax, and the bass and the guitars, and those are all side chained just to let the kick come through a bit more in there. It's not going to be a dramatically noticeable difference, but it is going to be subtle enough that it really lets your kick shine through and just have that punchiness that you really are looking for in this kind of a track. Then the next thing as well with all of those things brought together is just to hear how they sound. So when you bring in the chords, the pad, you've got the backing keys, the bass, we've got our guitars and our drums, you can hear what all of this sounds like. So let's just take a listen to the instrumental side of that. Hear those keys come in. So it all works really well together. Now, all of these instruments were set and established and in there, and then I went, I really need a saxophone. And so let's talk about how lucky I got with this sax. Now, a lot of the times when you were sitting there and you're like, okay, I need this instrument or I need this thing, what you can do is hit up a session musician and have them come in and record that part. Now, you may not always have the know-how to reach out to session musicians, nor the budget to pay for a session musician, because obviously they require funds. And that is okay. What I want to showcase is that by using sources like freesound.org or Splice, which I know a lot of producers will be familiar with, or even the old classic YouTube, you can typically find what you're looking for just by doing a little bit of digging. That being said, I did get very lucky with this sax. I basically typed into YouTube exactly what you're seeing here, 80 beats per measure, sax a cappella. I think I might have put in solo or something. And I found this channel called 51 Music that puts out a bunch of samples totally made for free use to chop up, put up in your tracks, and use commercially. And so shout out to 51 Music for doing all of that, because there's some great samples in there. But it really just goes to show you that you never know what you're going to find unless you just look. And without looking, I would have never found this sax, which has become one of my favorite elements of the whole piece. So let's listen to it on its own momentarily. You can even hear the metronome clicking in the background of this track, which I think it adds kind of to the sort of fun found nature of the sound. But there's really not too much happening, even though it looks like there's a lot of effects in there. The EQ, the compressor, the limiter, even the RC20 is more so just adding room to the tone and not heavily affecting it, just kind of boosting its presence. So when I turn everything off real quick, you can just kind of hear that it doesn't change too much of what the sax actually sounds like. It just really helps to boost the presence and quality of it, as well as get more of that airiness that comes from a wind instrument being played. The RC20 really helped to bring in the noises of the valves opening and closing, which I really liked as well. I'm a big fan of those kinds of textures, which is why I like that soft piano so much from Labs, because you can hear all of the little intricacies of the creaking of the chords and like the sounds of the hammers in the piano. So all of these things combine together with the vocals, our melodics, our sax, and create quite the impactful moment right here at the end. So that was 32nd Street, a great lo-fi jazzy track with some voyeuristic qualities to it, of course featuring the incredible vocal talents of Miss Sara Ornelas. Now on the next one, we're going to be talking about Driving in the Rain featuring Jordan Mckinley. A lot of great stuff to talk about that. Another incredible featured talent on that one as well. So until then, keep sharing and listening to the album. Stay locked in here for more of these track breakdowns, and I'll catch y'all on the next one.
Come a little closer without losing your composure to me. Do you feel this rare